Hey everybody, Tom Coyle from Ventures in Leadership, and we've got Jan Rutherford here with us today. And he'll talk just a little bit about what he's up to and his kind of thing. And we're just going to talk about specifically remote work and what it means for leadership. And we'll have just a very informal conversation, kind of unscripted, but just letting the natural conversation flow. And I think you get some good nuggets here. Jan goes more about himself. He's a former special forces. He has his own leadership program that he does now. He's very, very successful, has this leadership podcast, and does his crucible where he gets everyone together for this very intense leadership exercise. And with that, I'll let Jan talk just a little bit about himself and what he's doing, and then we'll kind of get the conversation.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Tom. I'm actually just back from 2 crucible expeditions in the mountains of Colorado in the Rockies. And we had 2 different groups out, and each group had both executives and veterans, and lots of lessons. And I would say the main epiphany was, it's not often we're really in dispute about the direction we're headed. For our expeditions, there was a summit, but the tone and the pace was completely up to the individual group and the leaders that led on these. And by tone, I mean attitude, and by pace, I mean how fast or slow are you going to go? And what we found is, attitude is everything, of course, not a big surprise, but pace, if we went slow enough, we could get the whole team up there. And one of the things that everybody reflected on was, geez, am I setting a pace, my team back in the real world can actually follow? And how do I know if they're following? Out on a mountaintop, it's easy. I mean, if you look behind and they're right behind you, they're there. And if not, you're going too fast. The work world isn't so simple. And I think part of it is we set expectations and then we march. And then a month later, we come back and we say, okay, it's accountability time. And that's just too much time. We can't even go for an hour out on a mountaintop and think that's enough communication. I mean, we have to communicate constantly. Here's where we're at. Here's how fast we're going. Here's when we're going to stop. Here's what we're going to do on the break. Here's how long the break is. And then here's how much farther it is to go. And here, pace yourself. And again, I think those are great lessons for people, especially in the context of dispersed and remote workers.
No, fantastic.
And you've got some remote workers there. I can hear them.
Yes, and I apologize for that, but that's just the reality of where I live in. I got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and doing the best they can. And these workers are so demanding; they want Cheerios. I never asked my boss for Cheerios. Can you believe that? But yeah, so it has been a joy, this environment, for being there. But these are things you have to manage, and I think as leaders, being understanding about this. Your employees are going to have to sit there with kids who need supervision, and the kids don't necessarily see the blurred lines. And it's, obviously a high school kid can maybe separate that about, okay, I need to give that mom and dad some space. They got some work to do. With younger kids, that's hard. And we have to be, first off, as leaders, let your employees know that, hey, no, this is okay. And for me, it was funny because when I was at the State Department, I was sitting there and we had a snow day or whatever. And so I brought my son in with me into work. And I went in there, we're getting ready to go to the meeting. I came in there with me and said, hey guys, why don't you meet our, he's joining us here, observing. He's kind of like the Bob's from Office Space. He'll be evaluating your performance today. Made a joke about it. And the rest of the workforce, oh my God, thank you for doing that. Because they were all like worried about, oh my God, if I bring, what's Tom going to say if I bring in my kids, or what's going to happen? And, we have these challenges. And then, with me as a leader going, well, I have the same challenges you do. And even if maybe you don't have kids or you have kids who are older, we have to sort of appreciate this is what people might be dealing with, and showing them how they can strike that balance and not flip out just because someone's kid's in the background. Understand that, hey, this is the reality we're all dealing with.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, interesting times for sure.
Well, one thing I want to talk to you about, and this is less about remote work, but I think this brought up a great topic. I was at the Special Forces Assessment course, and when we were at one exercise, we were getting along there. And we were all going in there, and one of our peer groups, we're in teams, and they didn't make a suspense. And what had happened was there was one guy that kept trying to wait for and all that kind of thing. And they made the argument in that case, like, hey, in this case, you don't want somebody who doesn't have the same stamina and endurance as you do. So in other words, this is not like, we understand don't leave a man behind, but in this case, this person's not keeping up. And is this someone you want, going down the road, being in that situation with you? And then I take it back to your crucible exercise. You have to look at the pace. And I want you to talk about the balance you have to strike between, making sure everybody can keep up, and also making sure, do I have the right people? Because maybe if someone's not keeping up, do I have the right team, if you will? And maybe some thoughts on that.
Well, yeah. I mean, I always think of it as in three phases. I mean, you've got selection, you've got onboarding or welcoming, and you've got ongoing development. And oftentimes you're out there with a team, and you're like, I'm not sure I have the right team. And actually, some of the people that I'm coaching right now are taking a look and given the new world, saying, I'm not sure I have the right team at this point. And it's a tough thing because we bring people in and we love them to death and we tell them they're family, and then we have to make hard decisions about going forward. And again, we all know that sometimes there's founders that are great, but they're not the person to take the organization to the next level. I think this goes back to having really great self-awareness and knowing, hey, am I still contributing at the level I was when I was first brought on? Is there a good fit here? And I think that's up to the individual. I think that's also up to the leader to decide, who do I need to select? How do I bring them on board? And how do I continue to develop them? And then how do I know if somebody's not a good fit anymore? And am I willing to have those difficult conversations to talk to people? And it's not a matter of being cold and callous, but again, it's having difficult conversations, letting people know what the expectations are. And, just like any team, if you're up on a mountain and you've got one person that's not a good fit or that has a bad attitude, it can poison the entire team. Because, up on the mountain, it might be you're cold, wet, tired, and hungry. But in the business world, it might be, you're just tired, exhausted, and cranky, Yeah. And, and a lot of us are these days. I mean, we're juggling a lot, both at work and at home and all kinds of demands. And the other thing is there's really different comfort levels. I could be on the mountaintop and say, that's not scary. That's only 300 feet down. And somebody could be scared to death. Well, the same thing is going on with this virus. I mean, some people are really comfortable going back to work and some people aren't. And, as leaders, we need to recognize that and understand, that risk is relative.
Oh, absolutely. And sort of on that point, like one thing for me is, sometimes the person who's not pulling their weight on the mountain is, so to speak, is maybe someone who just doesn't know what to do. They want to, it's not from lack of trying, but they have not been given the right skill set. This is where training comes in. Then you get some other folks, it's just, look, you know what? Maybe this is just not what you do. There's some, like, maybe you're the person who sets up base camp and runs base camp and runs radio station. And you're really good at that. And we embrace that. We need that. And someone who can coordinate rescue people if something's needed. And so I think, a lot of us go into things saying, what am I good at? And sometimes that becomes apparent or changes over time. My transition from the military to the diplomatic corps was just, I felt like that skill set I was looking at this opportunity. I thought, well, this looks like it'd be more like me. And that period of time was great because that's where I really contributed to my strengths. This was, I felt my contribution going to some of the places around the world I did as Tom the Diplomat. I felt that was a better use of my strength than Tom, just a junior officer walking around with a group of folks out in the boonies somewhere. I felt I made a better contribution that way and understanding where that contribution is.
Yeah. Well, again, that goes back to, having great self-awareness of knowing, where your interests are, what you value, where your skill set is, and making sure that you're in an organization where that's aligned. I think one of the biggest mistakes is oftentimes we let somebody else decide if there's alignment, if there's, if the core values match up. So, I really do think there's something to be said for successful executives that basically decide when they self-select out of certain environments or jobs and find a place that's a better fit. The true litmus test to me is if you feel like, hey, you can be yourself 100% in your role at work with the people that you are with, then that's probably a good fit. If you feel like you've got to be someone different and there's a stress and a strain to it, it's probably not a good fit. And, as we say, life's too short. I mean, we all want to be in roles where we can provide for our family or whatever those goals are, but also something that's, really fulfilling and we feel makes a difference in the lives of other people.
And I want to just something that's specific to veterans here at this point. 'Cause,
Hmm.
I want to talk how I always jokingly said, wrote an article on LinkedIn, how quitting is underrated.
Yeah.
Because, we look at the military, like, it's somehow like shameful if you're going to SEAL selection, you ring the bell or you withdraw from selection course,
Hmm.
or you like people like, it's almost looked at as like a failing. But, as I got older and wiser, I realized, no, actually when someone realizes, look, this is just not me.
Right.
That's maturity, and there's no shame in saying, what, this is not what I want to do. Maybe it was at one point, but it's not now. And I remember since football season's approaching, I always share this article from 2 years ago. We all wanted to be Vontae. I can't remember Vontae's last name, but he was the guy from the Buffalo Bills who at halftime just, I quit. I don't want to do this anymore. And he goes, how many times have you been in that meeting? Like, I can't take it. I can't take these PowerPoints anymore. And have those on it, but also tying it into Safi Bakal's book, Loon Shots. I'm not sure if you've read that book.
Yeah, Safi was on our podcast.
Okay, awesome. Actually, I remember that. I remember that, and I actually met him at a book signing. I thought it was really interesting, and he brings up his experience at McKinsey, where not only do you have to have the self-awareness, but I always call things like the handshake. You as the leader dealing with the people, you guys will be having these open communication standpoints. And it was McKinsey who said, you know what? He's not right for this project, nor is he right working under this person. But what we think he is he'd be doing much better if we moved him over here. And that's exactly what they did. And he excelled. Whereas on the path he was on, he wasn't excelling. And maybe at a different enterprise like McKinsey, who didn't value this development the way they did, he might've just been fired.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking to your point about quitting, I got asked that once when I was on the stage speaking, they said, is it ever okay to quit? And I thought about that for a long time. And I thought, well, when you realize that what you're pursuing doesn't align with your core values, of course, then that's worth quitting. But, quitting because there's discomfort or sacrifices required or personal self-discipline and you don't like it and it's uncomfortable, those aren't good reasons. If you say this isn't the direction, this isn't what I value, then it's better to make that shift and move on. And again, it goes back to all of us at some point deciding what we want. And that's the seminal question as an executive coach, is asking people, well, what do you want? Do you want to be, as a CEO? Do you want to have perfect life balance? Do you want to climb mountains? I mean, what the heck do you want? And I think the more clear we are on the sort of life that we want to design, with those close to us, I think the better, we're on track to achieve those and be happy and fulfilled. The guides that we take out on the expeditions, we've worked with them for years. They're a strategic partner of ours. And it's interesting because, as you might imagine, mountain guides and climbers and alpinists don't make a lot of money. And they'll often talk about, the trade-off. And it's, to them, and most of these folks are relatively young, they'll say, I value my time over money. And so they'll say, I might not be rich in terms of wealth, but I'm rich in terms of time and what I get to do and my hobbies and the pursuits. People spend their whole life saving up so that they can do the things that we do every day. And then you think, well, who's rich? The person with the money who can't do these things until they're in their 50s or 60s, or somebody that's, scraping by and doing those things in their 20s and 30s and living life to the fullest. And again, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It really goes back to, well, what do you want?
Right.
What are you willing to do to sacrifice for it? And often it is, that binary between time and money.
Well, exactly. And like for me, I've had this evolution of things. And right now I've been really into the artificial intelligence, machine learning space, and just some accidents of things happened, but I got really interested in this. And now I'm working with a startup right now as advising them as their solutions officer, helping them with their machine learning stuff, working toward a product there, and really interested in this is how this all came together, and not being afraid to embrace it, because things are changing all the time with technology. And sometimes like what is here now, 5 years, there might be something else. And
Right.
with all this stuff coming in there, there's going to be new opportunities to
Yep.
explore.
Yeah. And that's what's so exciting, about this. One of the things that I think the silver lining in this crisis is, there's a massive sea of change. And I think what we're seeing is not things that wouldn't happen no matter what. I think we're seeing an acceleration of things that were inevitably going to happen. And, I just can't help but think there's a whole bunch of people out there that 5 years from now are going to say, crazy thing, I started a new venture during the pandemic, and wouldn't you know it, we've been super successful. I think there's lots of people out there that are embracing these times as an opportunity and, to step back. And I've seen a lot of people say, hey, there's a lot of things that are really inconvenient. We know people are suffering, but a lot of people have said, hey, this is one of the best things that's ever happened as far as family time. I talked to an executive who said he was on his way to being divorced, and the pandemic basically forced he and his wife to, repair their marriage. And, and then on the work side of things, I think for me, it's the first time all my clients basically have the same problems, the same challenges. And so with that, we're all able to look around and say, hey, what are the best practices? And, we're talking about remote work, and it's funny. Somebody at a very big company today said, gosh, our meetings are going to hell in a handbasket. A lot of times people don't have their camera on. The lighting's bad. I can't see them. I want to know that they're not distracted. And to me, it just reminds me that we either have a culture by design or a culture by default. And I don't think most organizations have been very intentional about, hey, this is the medium by which I work now, this 2-dimension. And, here's the rules. Hey, if it's during your business hours in your time zone, you're expected to be, dressed and on camera, with good lighting and good sound. And that's just a form of respect. And when it's not, there's other things, but we haven't been very intentional. I mean, we're trying to be really compassionate, but we haven't said, well, this is the environment. I mean, we had rules when people came into the office.
Right.
Why don't we have some cultural norms when we're communicating this way? And I think that's really important. And I'm not a fan of, hey, let's all get on the Zoom at the same time and drink or work out and do hot yoga. I don't know. I kind of think that team building happens when teams are actually doing the work that they were designed and set up to do. Not other things.
Well, I think that's the thing about knowing your people, knowing your culture. Some people that might work for, some people may not, and understand that. Like
right.
one of my clients I was working with, what I told them is like, what they have to do because they're in the same kind of issues. People, this thing, I said, well, some people may not be on camera for a reason. My wife's still breastfeeding, for example. So if she had to be on a Zoom call, she may not want her camera on. So what you got to do is set the tone, but then tell people, hey, look, if there's a reason you can't be on camera or something, just let me know. Just, shoot me an email. And he was like, oh my God, this is fantastic. Because people are like, hey, I'll be there. I won't be on camera because I've got this going on, or this is then when they did that and he realized this was all working. And then it increased engagement. He also gave him the warm fuzzy that people are engaged. Just like, hey, just rate, because we're in this environment where it's all blended, work and life, and you might be working in your time zone, but you have other things going on there. Just raise your hand and say, hey, look, here's what's going on.
Right.
I got this.
Right.
Or, you know what? We got the telemedicine coming in here at the 15-minute mark of our meeting. So I'll have to ditch out and do that for the kid. Then I'll be back on and just, okay, great. I know what's going on. And then that way, in the absence of communication, people always fear the worst. And this is where you've got to really over communicate in this environment more so than you would if you're all in the same office.
Yep. Yeah. I think that's a great point. Again, going back to the expedition example, one thing that we've realized, I mean, our missions are really simple. Hey, we're walking from point A to point B, but we can never communicate enough. I mean, out there it's, how often are we breaking? How long's the break? All those all those different things. And again, I think it's so unrealistic to think that we can go a week at a time and check in with people for, 5 to 15 minutes. And, oftentimes when I'm coaching people, sometimes it takes an hour or an hour and a half to really figure out what the issues are. And that's because we struggle with the question. When we're struggling through an issue or a problem or a challenge, I think what we really got to do is get the question right. And by that, it might start out with, hey, I don't know what to do with this particular teammate. And then at the end, the question might be, hey, how do I get better at framing expectations or having difficult conversations? Oftentimes it goes back to me, not the other people. And that's where I think, leaders need to really focus on what they can control and have that self-awareness.
Well, how I got into coaching, sort of my first foray into coaching when it was unofficial coaching, one of my fellow captains, we were having lunch at the officers club, and he was complaining about his XO. His XO is not performing right. And I've met his XO at some various social events. His XO seemed like a sharp guy to me. He's like, he's just not. I said, okay, stop for a second. How are you communicating this to the XO? Mm-hmm. I bring him in. He's like, I said, well, I start off with, and he basically said, well, I tell him, hey, you got a lot of great energy. You're doing a lot of great things. There's a few areas I want you to work on. So work on those, but keep it up. I said, okay, sit there. He's hearing like, okay, I'm doing a pretty good job. I got a few areas. That's so long as I'm like everybody else, a few shortcomings, but I'm kind of on the glide path. Mm-hmm. Try this approach. You are failing as in this job as being XO. Here's my expectation, but don't worry. I see that you're all panicked. We're going to work on a game plan right here. And if we follow this game plan, you're going to be right on track and you'll be a rock star. Mm-hmm. And he did that, something along those lines, but wordsmithed a little bit to make it more like his natural to him. But yeah, all of a sudden the XO turned around from being this guy who's not getting the job done to being the rock star. He just didn't know when it wasn't communicated properly.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
And so then, have you been exposed to, or your thoughts on, like, what I'm excited about is virtual reality, because how that can really replicate the in-person experience much more so than a Zoom can. And I've been seeing some demonstrations and playing around with that. In fact, where am I? Here it is. My son and we actually made our own virtual reality headset here.
Oh, geez.
Works with the cell phone. So if you download those YouTube videos, or virtual reality videos, we've actually made our own virtual reality videos. And I get sick on the virtual reality roller coaster, the motion sickness, just like I do in a real one. So I thought, okay, wow, this stuff is pretty impressive.
I have very limited experience with VR. I'm kind of more excited about augmented reality. What's possible to, that the computers can enhance in what we're already seeing. As an example, on expeditions, we'll use a peak finder. So we'll be looking at peaks and through the phone, and it'll tell us of all the peaks we're looking at, what the name of them are. And that's kind of cool. And I think there's, probably some interesting applications in business. I mean, we're always trying to figure out, what's going on from a group dynamic perspective. I wonder if at some point, you're able to put this up and it's going to actually identify emotional overtones coming from the group, and not so much that you can call people out and say, you're this or you're that, but hey, how do you need to adapt your communication style to be more effective with different people in different situations? And again, not that it's going to make us robots, but it would be a teaching and a training tools for us to help to, learn and adapt and become more effective. I'm reading a really good book right now by Jonathan Haidt called The Self-Righteous Mind, and it's why religion and politics divide us. And, that's been, really eye-opening. And it's one thing to read it, but it would be one thing for somebody to point out in real life, at real time, hey, when are your biases showing up? All the different kind, confirmation bias or whatever, whatever the bias is. I mean, we know that we're human, we're fallible, we're not perfect. All these things show up, and just being aware of it would be, enlightening.
Well, absolutely. In fact, actually, I just wrote down that book myself to check it out myself. It was interesting how this bias is that, brings in technology. So a lot of leaders were like, I agree that I actually wrote an article on Medium and how basically we've just accelerated 5 years of development. COVID is just accelerating trends that were kind of already happening. And, you look at like AI and machine learning, and one thing about machine learning is they found out a flaw, what was happening. A woman, I'm trying to remember her name. She was African American, but she was a chief technology officer for the federal government. I think it was for FAA, but I have to look back in the story. It's in the book, Prediction Machines. And what happened was when someone came across, she got told that when someone Googled her name, it has she been arrested? And she pays the subscription fee and get that. And what was happening was Google's training models, whatever, is because they're looking at data of names of people being arrested. And so when they do these searches that people pay these ads for the different services, people with African-American sounding names were getting flagged on, in Google banner ads to say, check the arrest record of so-and-so, sort of because certain names were matching from the data that was working with. And so the bias that was being expressed in the ML was flagging people more so than like minorities, more so than white people about like, arrest record, even though they weren't in there. She paid the service. Okay. Yeah, no, I've never been arrested, but like, and think about how damaging that can be to somebody. And so how like the biases we're talking about now as people, well, if with people making machines and developing machines, we bring those own biases there. And this was like an unintentional, they break it down in terms of how like the mistake and all this kind of thing and how the data, because you're just using data of names of people who have been arrested before when it starts matching first names and such. So this is the danger of this and really looking at the bias and mentioning, because no matter what the technology has, if we start with imperfect view of the world, which we always have as an imperfect view of the world, and if we're not constantly checking our biases, we're going to make bad machines, or we're going to make bad leadership decisions.
Yep. Yeah. Bad machines. Yeah. And imperfect future leaders. So, with all our fallibilities. Yeah, interesting.
So as we're getting kind of winding down here, I want to maybe just in terms of, because impersonal communication is not new. Obviously, people communicating a lot through email, not new. I wanted to get your perspective on a couple lessons learned for leaders out there in terms of that we can apply to this virtual environment where now we're sort of seeing each other, but just particularly the impersonal communication, messaging apps, those types of things, Slack channels, these things are still being used, and some thoughts on that as a leader.
Yeah, we did a panel discussion a few months ago when the pandemic first started, and got some interesting perspectives from some young people that said, hey, I'm on teams where I never talk to people and we get lots of great things done. I think the leaders really need to adjust and adapt and not make, 20th century assumptions about what's really required. The other thing is, I think we've got to really look at what we think of as a team. Right. The traditional is, hey, people work 40 hours a week, they wear the company uniform, they bleed the company colors, and they have nothing else going on in their life except a desire to move up in the company. Well, we know 40% of millennials have a side hustle, at least. Mm-hmm. And, they're hoping, hey, if the side hustle really is successful, then that'll be my full-time gig. So we don't have the loyalty that, that same level of dedication, and we shouldn't expect it. And I think we've got to really figure out and how to adapt and make sure that, that we're really clear about the meetings. I mean, if we say, hey, this is a meeting for me to collect information, there's other ways to do that than to waste time. If it's a decision-making meeting, I think we've got to be clear about the criteria for the decision, the process, and who's going to make it. It's okay if you tell people, hey, you get a voice but not a vote. At least tell them. And, the other thing is, besides that, there might be meetings that are about sales, what's going on with accounts and the development of people. I think we've just got to be real clear and know, hey, this is the best way to move things forward. And again, I think there's much better ways to communicate than just getting people on meetings. And even these Zoom calls. Mm-hmm. I mean, we can't go back to back to back on video calls all day long. I've got clients that are now saying, hey, instead of 60-minute meetings, they're going to be 45. Instead of 30-minute meetings, they'll be 20. That gives people time in between meetings. I've had some clients that are saying, we will have no meetings from 11 to 1. That way you can go be with your family, go for a walk, go to lunch, whatever it may be. And again, I think this is a sign that leaders are creating an environment, a culture by design, rather than letting it happen by default. And it signals to people what you value, what you care about, in treating people as humans, not just resources.
No, Jan, absolutely. That's fantastic. And it goes back to two things I want to just bring it back to that never change no matter what medium we're leading. Communicating expectations and communicating things. That when you let people know what's going on, they don't know the score, it works. I had a client I worked with. He'd get off tangents, that kind of thing. So one thing he would do, and he'd walk around his employees with note cards. When he asked him how their weekend was, we glanced down the note card. He goes, but he would tell them, this is what his thing was. Like his employees, there was when I was getting his 360 feedback, he seemed disconnected, and so what he employed was, hey, I can get distracted easily. We're talking, we start talking about the football game, whatever. I might forget what I came over here to ask you about. So I have my note card there to specifically make sure the couple things I actually came on business related, I'm there to ask you about. That's why I'm doing that. When he explained it, like everyone loved the guy. They like, oh, okay, I know why you're doing that. Like, when you're thinking, it's like, how's your weekend? You look at your note card, like, what's going on here? No, I'm just making sure I do go back to the task, and then you communicate that. Expectations for meeting. And one thing about meetings, I try to take the approach. The one thing I advise is, these back-to-back things. Well, you're replicating the work environment, but every time you have a meeting, that means that meeting is something somebody's not doing the task you need them to do.
Oh yeah, and there's a cost.
Yeah, and sometimes we have these meetings back to, well, if they're meeting, it's like, what did you get done today? Nothing. I spent all day in meetings.
Right.
And so many meetings have been tools to avoid decision making. It just, you feel good about yourself, or you're used to an environment where you're expected to be at work for a certain amount of time. You're like, well, I don't have a task to do right now. I'm going to look bad if I just go home. I'll have a meeting. That way I look like I'm doing something. And it's sort of a false sense of productivity. And oftentimes it's a way to avoid decision-making, as opposed to, it cuts into people's time. So I always tell people, try to do 2 meetings a day and keep it there. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but if you stick to 2 or even less than that, it's much better for everyone's sanity.
Yep. Well, I think the other thing to do is, not all the time, but once in a while, really calculate the cost of a meeting. Take the salary, divide by 2,000. That's the average number of hours people work a year, and then multiply the number of people in the room, and then what are the things that they didn't get done, and then what has to be after the meeting. What has to be the return on that meeting? So again, coming out of the meeting, people need to be even more productive, more efficient.
Yep.
To provide the return on basically pulling people away. I don't think we calculate that cost and help people be aware of it, because meetings aren't free.
No, they're not. And the thing is about that, I had most of my meetings I've been to don't have an actual action that I'm supposed to walk away from that meeting.
Yep. Yeah. There's no agenda. There's no minutes. And I always say at the end of the meeting, the only good meeting is at the end of the meeting, who does what by when.
And Jen, I think it's a great way to end this discussion right here. I think just no matter whether we go back to in-person workplace or in the virtual world, meetings, temper those. Ask yourself, listen to what Jan just said. Do I need to have this? What's the checklist? What's the outcome? Can I find other ways of getting that same information? And think creatively about that. Jan, I want to thank you for coming on today, chatting with me here today.
You're welcome.
Love this again sometime. Any last words you want to pass on to the audience?
I finished my book by basically saying decisions determine destiny. And I think I'll leave that with the audience.
All right. Outstanding. Well, thanks, Jan. I really appreciate it and look forward to doing this again soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom.